Hello and welcome to this final part of this Building a Temple series in 3D-Coat. This is where we move over into Blender. Just a bit of a disclaimer on here. I'm new to Blender myself. I'm still learning it, and I'm using this project as a little bit of a learning project for myself. So I'm sure that a lot of people out there can make a much better job of this, but this is my first attempt really at rendering something inside of Blender. Essentially what we've got here is all the assets that we've brought in terms of the temple itself. I've brought in the character here. Obviously it's the correct resolution. If we remember at the very beginning of this project we kind of decimated this character down because as it was just a reference object. So this is the original one. And then I've downloaded a couple of assets from Polyhaven. And then in the far background here, we've got the Blender add-on, the landscape add-on that's just been used to create some sort of sand dunes in the back. We've also got some Hdri images again from Polyhaven that I've used in the background as well. If we look a little bit closer, we can see the details from what we did inside of 3D-Coat. We've got these sort of coarse rocks here with the sandstone worn away on there, and it's all come through pretty well. We've got the metallic kind of underlying elements that we talked about in the previous videos under there, and we've got these sort of decoration elements on there as well that we did. It didn't come out too badly, so what I'm going to do next is just show you just the basics of how I set this up. Just before we begin, it's just important to understand that I don't go into any detail regarding how to do things in Blender. So it's more about just a basic setup and just going through the different steps that I did in a very, very limited way. I've picked up a lot of the information just by going through YouTube, etc. And also I've obviously added a few plugins which I'll talk about later in the video to help me along the way with this process. Just bear that in mind as you're looking through the video, and I hope you find it useful. Okay, so here we are inside of 3D-Coat. We've used in the previous video 3D-Coat's internal render engine just to give us some ideas of how this may look. We are now going to just take all of this over into Blender and use Blender to do some renders. To do that, we'll go to File, Export Objects. In the top of the dialog box here, you'll see Export Geometry. Here we'll select our path for that and save it out as an FBX. We'll do the same for the textures, making sure it's in the same location roughly. And also we'll set a name for those textures as well. And down here under Export Presets, we'll use the Blender App Link preset, even though we're not actually using the Blender App Link. We'll use that just as a way of giving us a selection of maps that we can pick and choose from in terms of what we need. For example, I don't need the emissive map or the displacement map for this particular project, but I will keep the diffuse, metalness, roughness, normal, and also I'll just do the AO map as well. Now you'll notice here that for the diffuse map I do have an alpha channel as well. Once you've selected your paths and you just click export, you should end up with something like this. Now here I've got two FBXs in this folder. One of them is the moss rock set that I spoke about in the introduction, which essentially is a download from Polyhaven. Here are the textures associated with this FBX. So the main ones that have just come from 3D-Coat is this temple FBX and the set of maps here. So with those set, we're pretty much good to go. Okay, so here I am inside of Blender. Now what I've done is created my scene ahead of time. It's going to be a little bit boring for you to just watch me set a scene up. I've gone and done this, and I'll just slowly reveal the elements as I sort of introduce them. The first thing to do when you've exported your information from 3D-Coat is obviously to import. Here I've got my import dialog box. Just go to File, Import, and then FBX. And here is the folder with my temple FBX in. So just literally select it and hit import. And the same thing goes for the other elements as well. And we have those assets all collected here on the side as we import them. Now, a good way to do this I found is obviously to to use this little icon at the top here and create a collection. And it's just a nice way of just storing things and just keeping this outliner or whatever it's called. You can see here that I've already imported the temple object. There we go. So I've already got my temple object here, and I've also got the male viz architectural visualization object here. Now this is a much higher resolution one than we used inside of 3D-Coat, as you can see. Again, this was purchased from 1024. So with those two in, you can see here that I've got those in this collection here. So here I've got the Mossy Rock collection. Those rocks which have been imported into the scene. Each one has then been kind of duplicated, and some have been used as a kind of a landscape, sort of flat ground, and all I've done there is just selected, like for example one like this, gone to the scale and just squished it down and stretched it out. So you can see how many of these Mossy Rock objects I actually duplicated and brought in. So there's no point in me showing you how I did each one. These ones are pretty much left as is, just spun around using the rotate tool and then just positioned to make up the shot. There is an extra one here that I didn't mention at the beginning called the Cast Rock, and if I just zoom out again, you can see these ones here. These ones are used as distant rocks, very large rocky areas, and if you look on this side of the view here, you can see they're kind of way off in the distance, but quite a nice thing, and it's just tying in with these initial foreground rocks and those large ones, and it almost tells a story in a way that this temple, when it was built, was possibly carved out of these rocks, or these rocks were quarried in order to make this. It kind of just helps to tie the scene together in a way. I got these ones from, I didn't get them from Polyhaven, I got them from Photo Bash, and it was just purchased from there, but they're quite good assets. It's worth going along to this website, and because sometimes they have free items in there, so it's just worth checking that out every now and again. So that's the Cast Rock, and then I mentioned before about the sand dunes, which were created using the landscape add-on inside of Blender itself. So they were positioned way off in the distance behind our temple scene here, roughly on this side, way back, and a little bit more closer to the camera over on here. So you can see the scene is slowly building up now. Once all your objects have been placed inside of Blender, then it's time to set up the actual textures from 3D-Coat. There's a couple of ways we can do this. First of all, we obviously select the object here, and we can use the shading tab here. I've actually set up a window just at the bottom down here so we can keep this information visible at the top. And when I've selected this, I have a material here which is called Temple, and I have a node structure set up here which gives me the information on here. Now you can't see anything at the moment because I'm in this viewport shading mode. Once I click on the texture mode here, so our textures are on here, we can see everything's coming, or everything has been set up rather, as it looks inside of 3D-Coat. So let's just have a look at this. Now it's worth pointing out that if I was working with the 3D-Coat Blender app link, all this information that you can see down here will be already set up for me. What I've done here is just gone through it, looking at that as reference, i.e. how the Blender app link sets up these files, and then I've just recreated it. Just as I said at the very beginning, it's a way for me to kind of learn how to do this manually rather than depending on that app link to do it. But you'll start off essentially with something like this, with an output node, a material output node there, and a principled BSDF node here. And all those maps that we created inside of 3D-Coat get linked to the color, the metallic, and the roughness, and also the normal down here. So if we just look at this one, the color one at the moment, the diffuse. So we start off with this UV map node here, and if you don't know how to create a node, then simply click in the empty space here, hit Shift A on the keyboard, and it's better just to hit the search box there. And obviously if you know what you're after, you can just type in UV and it'll give you the top of the list there. That's the one that it's found, which happens to be the one that we're after. Okay, so I'll just delete that because we don't need it. And then we've got our diffuse. So again, it's the same thing. Shift A, click on there. It's not actually called a diffuse. I've renamed that one. It's actually called a texture image. Image texture. So you can see there it is. And all I've done there is then clicked on the open to find the file in the export folder from 3D-Coat, and then that pops up and populates this field here. So let me just delete that one. And you can see how these kind of connect in. And that, again, as I said before, it's just a case of, for example, looking at the app link and seeing how that hooks these up, and then trying different ones, trying different nodes to see how that will affect your final result in the output here. So here, for example, in order to give me a little bit more control over the colors that are used in here, we've got an Rgb Curves, which is similar to, well, it's pretty much the same as the thing that you get, curves adjustment layers that you get inside of Photoshop. We've got a hue and saturation, again, exactly the same, and these all get linked up. And then these are plugged in to our principled shader here, and then that connects to our surface material output. So I do appreciate that's just sort of really not even scratching the surface of it, but these things, you need to sort of go in and play with them a little bit more, and that's what I did to sort of get where I am here. And I've gone through the same process again and again, and just tested these out, moved these sliders around, see how they affected the model, and that's basically how you get to understand what these are capable of, and how much you can have control in terms of editability over the final result. So go through all those and connect them up. You'll notice here that when we exported from 3D-Coat, we also exported in our diffuse, we exported an alpha channel as well. And if you've got alpha information, which we don't have actually on here, then that alpha can be plugged into the alpha channel of our shader here as well. Okay, so once that's done, we kind of rinse and repeat for all these objects here. Sometimes when you bring in FBX, it'll automatically connect those up anyway, and you won't have to do any of this, so it makes life a little bit easier for you. So with those textures all set up on all the objects in the scene, it's time to look at the lighting and also the environment. So you may have noticed earlier that I had these extra nodes in here, and these are to do with the Starlight plugin, which if I just show you, I got this over on Blender Market, so that gets plugged in there. Now I'm not quite sure about these plugins, as I said. I'm still learning Blender myself, so I don't really understand how these are why these need to be plugged in on this particular one, but it seemed to do that. If you go over here to the world section here, you can see here that it's also seems to be plugged into this one as well. But yeah, it's something that I've been playing around with, and I got the results that I got, and I was kind of happy with that. Whether it's the right way to do it or not, I don't really know. The other thing that I've used in the atmosphere is the the Hdri. Now that was from Polyhaven, and if you do a search on Polyhaven, here it is, and it was number 6, this one that I downloaded. So I downloaded this image and imported that into as a texture, image texture, and then I added a gamma node and a background node here, and that gave me a little bit of some values down here to play with as well, and those combined with my starlight atmosphere into this kind of an add shader node here, getting to the world output into this node here. Now I did add also a volume scatter for kind of like a thicker atmosphere fog type of effect, which I plugged into the volume as well. So the name, again, it's just Shift A and do a search for volume scatter, and again add shader. You can pretty much reproduce this one, not this one if you haven't got this plugin. An alternative to the starlight atmosphere is Blender's own sky texture, and to do that you could just go to search and just type in sky texture, and you can use this one, and this does pretty much the same thing as that one. This one's got a little bit more fancy stuff going on, but this is a nice basic one as well. So when they were all kind of plugged in and created as with the node links, as we can see here, you won't be able to see those, for example the HDR image in the background, until you hit on this little icon here, and then it brings in that HDR image, and you can see the kind of atmosphere effects from our starlight node there. So I've obviously gone in here and I've tweaked these values and tried to get something kind of where at first it's a bit of a painful process, just trying to get things to look how I want and understanding what the values mean, etc. But you know, with trial and error you get there in the end. And the next thing is to sort of brighten this scene up a little bit with our lights. So here I have a collection of lights that I've used. So if I turn those on here, we can go through and then have a look. So some of these lights are for a different scene. So for example, this one here, I've turned it on. I've called it blue mystery light, because in another render that I made, it was just kind of like a kind of a mystery element that was off the shot to the side. In this one, it's just acting as a little bit of a glow. In fact, let me just move this over now, because we can pretty much have a look at this in more detail. So you can see here, this is my what I've called blue mystery light, and it's located over on this side, and it's affecting this area here. We've got our pillar lights left and right, which, you know, they're just there and just illuminating this thing. It could be that, you know, if you remember from the previous videos, these were sort of metallic areas here, so the sun hitting down could be bouncing up. It doesn't necessarily need to be a light. It could be just a bit of very hard reflected light from a metallic surface. We have here our sunlight sky from the plugin that I mentioned earlier, which gives us the basic illumination here. And then I've got some extra lights just to so I have an extra sun on here, which really does sort of brighten the whole scene up a lot. And then I've got a couple of spotlights here. These were really for things like the character just coming out of the doorway to illuminate him a little bit more, and just a general sort of feeling of the building as well. Yeah, and this one, which is this one here, it was just to catch a little bit more light. So you can see here this gradation here. This light area here is caused by this light just illuminating this side of the building up a little bit more. So we can see that we've got this light coming down in this direction coming down. So it's really just pushing those elements a little bit more, and just trying to sort of convince you that the viewer that we've got sort of a strong sunlight coming in, or doesn't necessarily need to be a sunlight. It could be some mystery object beaming its light down onto the surface there. So it's really nothing complicated. It's not put together in any kind of sophisticated way. It's literally just drop a light in, see what I can do, and twiddle the parameters of the light, and just to get it to look reasonable. That was all I really wanted to do at this stage. So once all the lighting and atmosphere has been set up, it's a case then of going in and looking at your camera angle. So what I did was I got my camera and created a cinematic aspect ratio here, and it was a case then of just going in and finding a shot that sort of showcased exactly what we'd done inside of 3D-Coat, because that's the whole purpose of these videos really. It's more to do with 3D-Coat than it is to do with Blender. So it's the elements like the metallic here on the doorway and on these two pieces here, plus the stonework, the different layers of stonework that we worked on inside of 3D-Coat. This is what I'm focusing on rather than Blender itself. So once, as I said, we've got all that lighting set up, we can sort of move around here and sort of and inspect the work that we did. We can see those sort of nice water effects that we had dripping down on there. We can see the work that we did in the center of the temple object, the light coming in. And Blender's render engine is really good, especially Eevee, for this kind of very quick visualization of concepts, and doing things like the sort of depth of field effects. You can do these effects inside of 3D-Coat as well, but yeah, you've got a lot more at your disposal in terms of rendering and setting up materials and atmosphere, etc. inside of Blender. So it's really a case of just cherry picking which application does the best job for what you need, and in this case Blender does a great job. So this was the final shot that I settled on, and you can see we have some depth of field going on in there, the main focus being our character emerging from the temple. We have a sun direction here, which we can see from the Hdri, which is hitting the clouds from sort of this direction, and I've just enhanced that with obviously the lighting that we spoke about. Added some extra lights here, again just to emphasize that these objects on the side of the temple as well. So everything composition wise is trying to just lead our eye into, even with the placement of these rocks, just leading us in to the temple work that we did. Again, it's all about 3D-Coat really, this is. So I'll show you a few other shots of this using Blender, and we'll see just how much mileage we can get out of this simple object really that we've made. So here's the same scene. I've tweaked the lighting on here just to enhance these ones. I've added a fog layer here. Yeah, so I've thickened the atmosphere or the general fog from the volume scatter that we saw earlier, and then I've added in an extra sort of layer of fog on here as well. And again, I've increased the source light up here. And these sort of lighting areas here are those mystery lights I talked about before. So they just give you some sort of what's round the corner feeling as to what is generating that kind of bluish light. And it also is a nice contrast to the warmer lights that we have at the front here. So what I'll do now is just show you a few more renders of this one, and then we'll wrap things up. So here's the final render of that exterior scene, and we'll zoom in the details again. So looking at this and just assessing the work that we've done here in terms of 3D-Coat, obviously there are a lot of problems with this as an object, because we've got these really hard, sharp lines on everything, and it doesn't really work. But one of the things that we'll discuss when we're moving on in these videos in the modeling room is how we can actually use more displacements and sculpting information on these objects. Not particularly this one, but we'll do some more where we investigate more of how the modeling room and the sculpting room work together and how we can get the best of both worlds with those. So there are things that we can improve, but from a simple polygon object like this one, and these quite nice textures on there, we already get quite a bit of mileage from these images. Obviously, I mean, if you're a concept artist or somebody who wants to kind of paint over these to enhance them, yeah, you can render out different passes of these and then start to paint in those kind of displacement or worn out features which would break up the corners of these objects and round here. You see, it doesn't really make sense around the base here that we've got these rugged rocks formation, rugged rocks creation down here, and then it's really hard line on here, whereas it would be more sort of jagged like these ones going along. And we can do that in 3D-Coat. It's no problem at all. It's just the way that I've chosen to actually demonstrate with this one. So let's look at a couple of more shots. So here is kind of the mystery one I was talking about with the fog layer and moving this round. Again, we can sort of play with the lighting and add more lights in on the interior to make it more of a mystery type of thing. But we can see here all our information coming through. So let's just cycle through a couple of those. That's the render that we saw previously. And, you know, bringing in the moon possibly. So you can see what I was talking about here with these hard lines. It kind of breaks the illusion really of this object when we see these really extremely CG hard edges on everything. So that would need breaking up a lot. So here's an interior shot. We can see those metallic paneling that we created inside of 3D-Coat. The nice light beam. So we're using the nice fog from Eevee on this to cast lights through there. Again, another one from a different angle. That kind of wraps up this whole temple series that we've created. But hopefully you found it informative and given you some ideas of how you can use 3D-Coat, especially the modeling room, to create your objects. And as I said before, the plan now is to go forwards with this and go into more details about the modeling room. Thanks for sticking with it and watching all the way through. And I'll see you in the next video.